Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sticking around. We're going to continue with our cartographic research session and our third talk in the session, which is on mapping public perceptions of safety in city parks by Morgan Snyder, or by John Morgan. Yeah. Sorry. John Morgan at the University of West Florida.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, my name is John Derek Morgan. I go by Derek, my middle name. Sorry if that's confusing. That's my co-authors, or my teammates in this project, Jamie Snyder, Sarah Evans, and Jocelyn Evans. They're professors also at University of West Florida, where I work and teach primarily GIS and a master's degree in GIS they have there. All right, so this project came about through Jocelyn Evans' honors class that she runs every spring. She has around 50 to 60 undergraduate students, and she tries to do some kind of engaged project with them where she sends them out into the community to survey the community on an important topic. And then also teaming up with a couple of criminology professors who had previously done a study of campgrounds and perceptions of safety at campgrounds. And they had gone into local campgrounds and interviewed visitors there about social deviance and used systematic observation, Sampson's systematic observation, to look at those spaces and how people perceive those spaces as safe and crime-free. And so they wanted to go into parks now and actually, because those are important areas where people can go and engage with nature and one another, and they foster physical health and well-being. And there's a lot of parks in Pensacola, it turns out. And so they wanted to go into parks and conduct this survey on the perceptions of safety and concern for crime in there. And they brought me on the team as a geographer, and I started thinking about, how can we add the cartographic spatial element to this? And so I did look into, I had already an idea I want to do something with participatory GIS, so I looked into ways that this has been done, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second. But the idea was to add into this survey that they were already going to be conducting, a semi-structured interview survey, a mapping element that captured perceptions of safety within the parks. And this is a concern in Pensacola. While we were doing the project, it's not an extensive concern, but it is there. While we were doing this project, one local news article came out about this one park in central Pensacola that had a crime perception problem. It did have a crime problem, actually. There was drug dealing and other things like that going on. But then also homeless people were congregating there and, sleeping on this playgrounds and stuff. And so that article came out, and, the concerns for the local community. So it's at least relevant there to the local community. So one of the first things I did, and I've continued to do looking at our results, is looked at the literature on fear of crime, which goes back quite a ways to the early 1980s or late 70s. It turns out this has been a topic for criminologists and planners and environmental psychologists and even geographers. And so there's been a number of different ways that these people have surveyed fear of crime in public spaces. And one way is one recent way that's been done is through mail-in questionnaire, sending people questionnaires through the mail. And then another way that had been done longer ago in the early 80s by NASA famously was to do an in-person questionnaire with photos of streetscapes or landscapes or urban areas, and ask people about their perceptions of that space. And then in 1985, Westover, she's a geographer, did a similar in-person questionnaire without photos, but of park visitors, actually, which is very relevant to what we're doing. But she was looking at national forest and specifically didn't use participatory GIS, but did build on a lot of the work that was already being done. And there's also these models that these researchers have developed for how people interact with the environment. And then also there's also social elements, other people at the space, and their previous knowledge or the image, most importantly, the image they carry of that space. I have this quote: "Research on fear of crime can conceivably continue indefinitely because there's no critical experiment that will answer all the questions," and that's a quote from Garofalo. And I would tend to agree with that. So participatory mapping, that's what I was looking to apply this cartographic approach or method to this question. And some of you may have heard of that. It came about in the mid-90s from the National Center of Geographic Information Analysis meetings. Since then, there's been a growing use of this, and the previous speaker actually talked about mixed methods, and it would fall in that category, I think. Brown specifically has done quite a bit with engaging with people on how they value ecosystem services. And then also, I found like a very relevant paper by Boschman and Kubin that where they actually interviewed LGBT participants in St. Louis, Missouri, about areas of the city where they felt safe, less safe, more safe, on different ratings of safety throughout the city, and they used red, blue, and yellow to identify those areas. And that is really what I finally found, like what I wanted to do with this, was take their methodology and apply it to parks. And so, like I said, an important part of that is the image that people carry with them. And so this is a conceptual model I came up with where, it's building on those previous models of fear of crime, where, yes, the personal attributes are important and the social attributes are important, and the image is important, and that's linked all to the park features, the space of the park, like the natural amenities and also the built amenities. But what we're doing is inserting a map of the park in front of the participants and saying, tell us how you feel about the park on the map. And then I have that quote from Kevin Lynch: "Environmental images are the result of a two-way process between the observer and his environment." He's a famous planner who wrote The Image of the City. So here is me and an undergraduate student, Rachel Greller. She's now a grad student at Florida Institute of Technology, I believe. No, FIU, Florida International University. We worked together on this project in 2016 and developed maps for 5 parks. At first, I just told her, go download some aerial imagery and trace the maps, basically. I thought that would be the easiest first approach, but one of the first parks she downloaded, of course, it had been bulldozed and it was being redeveloped, and so the aerial imagery was not going to work in that case. We quickly realized we're going to need to go to these parks and do some ground truthing. And so that's an example of how we got to that. We used ArcMap and digitized over aerial photography, but then also ground truth the actual features of the park. And you can see the example on the far right is a survey map. So taking the map and putting it into a survey instrument where we actually have the question, where do you feel safe, indifferent, or less safe within the park? And with that, we would also give the participants markers and specify, use red for less safe, blue, I think it was blue for safe. Blue for indifferent, or neutral. We actually switched it to neutral. We decided on a second iteration that was a better wording, and then less safe. So So we sent these students out, 50 students out into 5 different parks. We've done this 2 years running now, actually, so we have more data than we've actually done analysis on. And they'd go up to people, and I just think it's a funny idea. Somebody just showed up to the park to throw the Frisbee, and they have this student come up to them, or a group of students, and start asking them questions about how they feel about the park and where they feel safe and less safe. Surprisingly, though, a lot of people were willing to participate in it, and we did receive a large amount of data. So that first round in 2016, we actually received a total of 195 responses, and you could see some of the characteristics of those responses. The age ranges were from the early 20s up through the 70s, mostly being in the early 20s. Also, some interesting general findings just out of this exploratory work on this is that males generally indicated larger areas of less safe than females, which may run contrary to some of your preconceived notions about that. And then also the median area selected as less safe by square footage was larger for male participants. Also, participants around the age of 40 years old or larger selected larger areas of less safe. So then we got this data, and yes, 5 minutes, thank you. We got this data is basically polygons. They had circled areas where they felt particular ways, and we needed to move that into a raster data set because I wanted to be able to do some type of analysis. And the best way I could determine to do that would be to rasterize this. And so I did that at 10 feet resolution, and there's my methodology for completing that. And here are some example maps. The top one is Bayview Park, which is a neighborhood park in East Pensacola. You could see the areas that are considered the safest are in the dark green, and the ones that are considered the least safe are in red. And then the bottom maps are of Legion Field, which is in a lower socioeconomic demographic area. But actually, what's interesting is through all of these maps, we began to see some pattern for where people felt the safest and where people felt less safe, particularly with regard to safety. Places where there was a clear use, like a dog park, people felt particularly safe about. Parking lots and edge spaces, as you would expect, were considered less safe. We did an inter-rater reliability test on all of the data, and most of it scored in the moderate category. Nothing scored substantial as far as the inter-rater reliability. The highest one was the baseball park, actually, which is a city park. The highest IRR on that in that regard was that people felt safe at the baseball park. Then there were interesting areas of agreement, such as this cross area in Bayview Park that's actually a part of an ongoing lawsuit currently with the Civil Liberties Union and the city where they're trying to get them to remove it, and this, constituents in the city don't want to. But it's interesting. You see that little green area to the right. It's like a little island of safety for the participants, it would seem, close to that park. And then also noted the basketball court in Legion Field, which, if you notice, is missing basketball hoops, which would be a key, built feature for playing basketball, I would argue. It was considered notably less safe than the area surrounding it, which indicates maybe some nefarious activities go on there. So that's actually it. I thought I had more to go, but that's actually it.